Good evening, members. We're getting started just a couple minutes late, and we don't usually do that, but we're happy that you're all here. Might mention as well, YouTube is where he's also putting it to where you can send someone to there and see the program. He edits it and does a real good job. Thank you, we appreciate you. Our speaker tonight will talk about all 14 constitutional amendments. He will discuss each amendment and a combination of amendments if they touch each other, and so that puts us in a position to where you'll be able to ask that question right after his discussion. And we'd appreciate you coming up here, especially to where we can record it and we can have a reasonable film before this evening is over with. So if you all will do that, we'd appreciate it very much. And I'd like to introduce it. Most people know who Joe Robideaux is. He's a state representative, District 45, married to Babette, 23 years. They have 3 children, all boys. Education, graduated from Our Lady of Fatima High School in 1980, graduated University of Southwestern Louisiana, Bachelor of Science in Finance 1985, graduated from Louisiana State University, Master of Science in Finance 1988, passed his CTA exam in 1990. Worked at Texas Instrument in Dallas after graduate school, former facility member at ULL, owner CPA firm since 1996. Currently serve as chairman in Ways and Means, chairman of the Joint Legislative Committee on Capital Outlay, member of the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget and the State Bond Commission. Previously served as a member of the House Committee on Civil Law and Natural Resources and the chairman of the Retirement Committee, appointed by the Speaker of the House to serve on the National Energy Council. First independent elected to serve as a Speaker pro temp in the Louisiana legislature. That's quite an accomplishment. We're happy that you're here with us this evening. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you all. Nancy wanted me to send her apologies. Nancy had agreed to do this, and she woke up, I think, with the sinus infection that a lot of folks have been waking up with, and she asked me to fill in for her, and I've been told that I'm not as easy to look at, but I'll do my best to explain the amendments. What I'm going to try to do, and it'll be difficult for some, but I'm going to try to give you all a sense of folks that are that may be for it and the reasons why, and folks that may be against it and the reasons why. I'm certainly happy to give you my personal opinion on it if anybody cares. I don't really think it would matter that much, but I'm happy to do that, and we'll open it up to questions after each one. Or there's a couple that are similar. The first 2, in fact, are fairly similar, so let's go ahead and talk about those. The first one is the Medical Trust Fund, healthcare provider base, and then the second one is a Hospital Assessment Trust Fund fee formula. And in general, I guess before I talk about the 14 amendments, you know, there's some folks that would make an argument that we really shouldn't, or rarely should we pass constitutional amendments anyway to clutter up the Constitution any more than it already is. That being said, and I accept that as a very valid argument, that being said, I'm going to speak to these amendments like, since they're on the ballot, we've either got to vote for them. Anybody that feels that way would obviously vote no on all of them, just because it does clutter up the Constitution, which really is probably not the best idea. But nonetheless, we're faced with having to vote one way or the other, so I'll give you the pros and cons. The Medical Trust Fund and Healthcare Provider Base Rate, in the simplest terms, the way that I can explain it is the nursing home folks and some of the state facilities for disabled feel like they would like some of their provider fees protected in the Constitution. I think, as most of y'all know, because of different times that I've been here and other speakers that you've had, in Louisiana, we've got two areas that are not protected by the Constitution, and that's higher ed and healthcare. And anytime there's a budget shortfall, then we're tasked with cutting from one of the areas that we're allowed to cut that's not in the Constitution, which is higher ed and healthcare. The higher ed folks are nervous about Amendment 1 and 2, even though they haven't been really vocal about it, and rightly so, because if we protect healthcare, they're left as the only one unprotected. And so when there's a $200 million shortfall in the budget, well, we're not going to divvy it up between the two. Some of the healthcare dollars will be protected in the Constitution, which means more of the cuts would fall on higher ed. Now, healthcare makes a very compelling case to say that if we want to provide the healthcare for the citizenry going forward, which is an aging citizenry, and it's just getting older and healthcare is getting more expensive, that we need this to continue providing it at a level that's adequate. And I'm not up here to argue that that's not a correct statement. I think the tough thing for me, and I think for most folks, is recognizing whether I'm going to fall on the healthcare side or the higher ed side, because that's really what you're doing with these two amendments. And I don't think either one of them is a wrong vote. It's just kind of where you fall on it. The second amendment has to do with, I don't know if you remember when Governor Blanco was in office, about a bed tax. And there's federal money that matches. If we tax ourselves, then the federal government will match us $3 to 1. And so the concept was brought about, the hurricane hit and all of that was shelved. But the concept was, hey, why don't we put in a bed tax for these hospitals, and by putting this $1 bed tax on, we can get $3 from the federal government, and that'll be a lot more money for us to provide healthcare services in the state. And because we're getting the match, they had it structured in a way that the hospitals wouldn't pass that tax on to the patients, because the state agreed to share some of the $3, to say, look, we're going to get this $1 from you, and we're going to get this $3 from the federal government, so we're going to now have $4 for every patient that goes through the system. But what we're going to do is we're not going to make you eat the $1 that you're having to pay to us. We'll give you that $1 back plus 25 cents of what the feds give us. Legally, it's structured in a way that the federal government would allow it, supposedly, but you know, that's remains to be seen, because you don't find that stuff out till after the fact. But that's the concept behind it. And you know, in a lot of ways it makes sense, because if you don't do that, you're leaving money on the table that, you know, our federal tax dollars that we send to Washington, it allows us to get more of that back. But that's what Amendment 2 is about. And but in that case, it's also putting it in the Constitution, and so it's protecting it and saying whatever we do with regard to the bed tax is going to be dedicated in the Constitution to health care, which means that money would not be available in the situation where there's a budget shortfall for higher ed. So those two are the first two, and I think it makes sense. If anyone has any specific questions, I'll try to answer it on those two, and if not, I'll move on to the next ones. Anybody got a question? Okay, we'll move on to number 3. Let me see if I can group this one. Yeah, let me group number 3 with number 10, thank you. 3 and 10 have some similarities. What they do, or what 3 does specifically, is when local government wants to be able to sell the property that's from because of delinquent taxes, the Constitution does not allow for local governments to contract that out to outside parties to do the work for them. They say, Constitution basically says, you collect tax dollars, you have a staff that's paid with tax dollars, let them go do their jobs, and that's the way it should be. We shouldn't have these outside parties being contracted to come in because they're paid separately and on sometimes as a percentage of what they collect, and it just they can stay around and haunt businesses forever. That was the concept. And for a place like Lafayette, it's really not, number three is really not an issue because Lafayette does do everything in-house. It doesn't contract it out because they do have enough of a staff. But a lot of these smaller localities, these small municipalities around the state, their argument is, I don't have anybody on staff with that level of expertise to be able to go and do that for the properties in our parish. And they're the ones that asked for this to be placed on the ballot to allow them to contract out with parties outside of local government. That's number three. Number, was it 10 we said? Number 10, tax sale of vacant, blighted, or abandoned property. Right now, it's a 3-year window when property is blighted and been vacated and abandoned. It would shorten the amount of time. Right now, it's a 3-year window that local government has to wait to make sure that there's no heirs that are out there and to allow whoever to appear before they actually go in and contract out to sell that property. New Orleans actually has it set at 18 months. This constitutional amendment would change the entire state to 18 months. And so I think if you talk to anyone in local government, they would say this is good because by the time it gets to the point where it's blighted and vacated and been abandoned, it's already been sometimes 2 years. So we're just saying another 18 months before we can actually put it back into commerce. Why do we have to wait a whole nother 3 years when we've been, trying to get it listed as an abandoned property and tried to find all the heirs prior to that? Other folks would say it's people's property, somebody's property at some point, and we ought to give them as long a period of time as possible to make that claim. And again, it's one of those, I think votes that it's kind of onto your personal preference of whether we keep it at 3 years or we move it to the 18 months. That's number 10. Number 4 is this infrastructure bank. This concept, I think, is a good concept. What it would do is it would establish a state bank that in the future, if ever there were federal funds, or if ever there were state funds, or if ever there was some toll revenue, something that came about, it would be placed into this infrastructure bank, and this bank would then be the bank for the municipalities around the state of Louisiana to go to and say, hey, will you loan us the money to repave these roads or to expand the capacity on this road? And it would be a low interest loan, and it would be a little bit easier way for local governments to do a lot of the infrastructure projects, sewage, drainage, roads around the state, rather than having to go to the state bond commission and issue bonds, because there's cost associated with issuing bonds, and then you got to decide when to do it based on the market interest rates and whether it's a good time or a bad time. And so what this constitutional amendment does is it establishes that there is an infrastructure bank. It doesn't fund it, it doesn't do any of that. And so a lot of folks say, well, why aren't we going to go set something up that may just be there on paper forever and ever until we find a way to fund it? I know Dr. Cam Mogasavi locally is one of the big proponents of getting the bank established because I think he feels like ultimately it'll kind of push the issue on funding, and it'll allow for a lot of these municipalities to start doing a lot of the infrastructure projects. I think we have like a $12 billion backlog at the state level on roads and bridge repairs, and he feels like this is the first step to kind of start to address that. And with the bank in place, it would it would incentivize the legislature to figure out a way to get the funding in the bank. Whether that's true or not, remains to be seen. But that's kind of the pro or con on number 4. I'm sorry, I didn't ask. Does anybody have any questions on any of the ones? Yeah, Alan?
Where are they getting the public funds to invest in this bank?
They're not. They're as of right
How
now.
do they get the money in there?
Well, that hadn't been decided. And so all of this is just to say that the state is allowed to establish a bank. It's just giving them the constitutional authority to do it, because right now that doesn't exist in the Constitution. Mr. Green had his hand up first.
Does this also include the money in the comprehensive annual financial report that every parish and city by federal law must have that we're not supposed to know about?
I'm not sure of the question. With the infrastructure bank?
Yes. It says public funds. Does it also include the capital funds?
Well, it says that it's set up to allow it to receive public funds, but the constitutional amendment itself does not specify that any money's going into the bank at all. That would be, I'd probably need to be up here a year or two from now when the legislature proposes something to say, hey, these are the funds that we're going to direct to the bank to be able to do these projects. Some people may say, that's a bad idea because currently these funds are used for this. So no, I want it to stay for this. I don't want it to go to the infrastructure bank, but that'll be the debate for another day. This is to establish the bank.
There's a strong history of when we put a politician in charge of a bank, money doesn't stay in that bank. I'd hate to see another infrastructure bank developed that the public doesn't have control.
Yeah, and there's a lot of detail I can give you on the structure of the bank. But at the end of the day, I think your argument is valid. I mean, it would be, technically, we are in charge, all the politicians are in charge of the budget as it is, and we're in charge of the capital outlay and what projects get funded. Now, what this would do is redirect some public funds into the bank, and then the bank would be run by some appointed board of directors that, and that's where that's I'm sure where your concern is. It depends who the governor is and who they appoint and how they get appointed. And
would Edwards be on there?
depends who's voting. We'll have a better idea after tomorrow if he would have a chance of being appointed to the board or not. Anybody else? All right. Number 5 is the elimination of the mandatory retirement age. For judges, currently the mandatory retirement age of judges is age 70. And that's not exactly accurate, so the headline's a little bit different. Currently, candidates for judge who are 70 or older cannot run for election or re-election. So you can run at 69. It's a 6-year term, so technically the oldest that a judge could be would be 75 under current law.
Could we expand that to state representatives?
We could expand, well, we can't tonight, but you'd have to have a state representative propose that there's an age limit. And so the opponents or the proponents to say, look, let's eliminate that. I mean, everybody's healthier, living longer, and it's ridiculous to limit folks to basically only be able to serve till they're 75 years old. The opponents would say, well, the power of incumbency for elected officials exists. The power of incumbency for elected judges is like double that of every other elected official, because you have to be a lawyer to be a judge. And so to run against a judge, you have to go in front that judge if you lose, and that judge gets to rule on every case that you hold, which means most lawyers say, I'm not running against an incumbent, I'll wait till he's out. Because I'm not going to subject me and my clients in my practice to the wrath of a judge that I ran against and lost. And so because of the power of incumbency, there's some folks that say we need to go ahead and set that limit. Now, whether you buy that argument or not, I'm just giving you both sides of it. I would have preferred if the judges would have come to us and said, can we move it to 74? But to eliminate it, meaning they could be 90 and still running, and no one's going to want to run against them, because now you have somebody that's suffering from dementia and is ruling against everybody that's ever run against them. And so it would have been nice if they had been willing to compromise on the age, because I think we all would have been a lot more comfortable. But nonetheless, that's what we're faced with.
There's a phrase, I think Ray Green sent it to me by email some time back.
Is it something you can say in public?
Thank you.
You're welcome, Ray.
Said, too many people are afraid to stand in the pulpit against the tide of change. And that's what that seems to be. People are saying, well, I'm not going to go against that entrenched judge. Well, maybe we ought to go against that entrenched judge. I'm not for career politicians.
Well, and I'm certainly not arguing that you shouldn't go against them, but I'm just saying that there is a price to pay for your clients, and possibly, maybe not. I mean, if a judge is really what we would like to think all our judges are, they would not hold it against anybody for having run against them, and they would rule like they would rule. But the possibility of that does exist, and so that's a concern, and so I think that's why it's even in law to begin with. And so all we're doing now is saying we're either removing it all or we're going to keep it where it is. I have a sneaky feeling if it fails, the judges will come back to us and say, oh, can we move it to 72, 74, just something a little more reasonable, which I thought they should have done. But they got it passed out of the legislature like this, so, what do I know? Number 6 and number 13, I'm not really going to spend much time on unless there's someone here from New Orleans. Both of these have to do with New Orleans. One has to do specifically with the lower 9th Ward, and one has to do with the police and protection in New Orleans. But because it's a constitutional amendment, there's a double hurdle. The entire state has to approve it, and the voters of Orleans Parish have to approve it. So if the Orleans folks vote yes and the rest of the state votes no, they're looked at as two different votes, then it fails. If we vote no and New Orleans votes yes, whichever way, both have to vote yes for it to pass. Yes, sir.
Is this creating an exception then for New Orleans versus what the rest of the state would be held to? Is that why the amendment is required?
That's correct. That's right. It's because they want to do something different than the rest of the state, which seems to happen quite frequently. Before I was a legislator and even today. Okay, so that was 6 and 13, so 7. We'll do 7 and 9 together.
That was 5.
That was 5. Well, 5 was the judges. I'm sorry, Ella. 5 was the judges. And then, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then 6
And 13.
6 and 13 were the New Orleans. I'm sorry, 6 and 13. So 7.
Joel, that's why they put numbers on it so you don't jump around like that.
I know, but some of them are so similar, it's just easier. So 7 and 9. All right, I'm going to talk about 7 first. 7 would give a bonus homestead exemption to veterans. Well, right now we give a bonus homestead exemption, meaning our homestead exemption is $75,000 in Louisiana, which is the highest in the country. We passed a law a while back that gave disabled veterans double, so it was $150,000 homestead exemption. Well, what happened is you could be 80% disabled by the federal government, but 100% unemployable. And so what this constitutional amendment seeks to fix is that if you're 100% unemployable by Louisiana's definition, you don't have to be 100% disabled by the federal government's definition, because we realized after we had passed it that there were some folks that were 80, 90% disabled by the federal government's definition, were clearly 100% unemployable in Louisiana, but they wouldn't qualify because of the way it was written. So we're changing the language to say that if you're 100% unemployable by Louisiana's definition, that you would qualify for the bonus homestead exemption. And that's only for disabled veterans, not for anybody else. Does anybody have a question on that one? Number 9 is similar. Right now, when you're age 65, if you have income at a certain level, a low enough level, you can go to the assessor and freeze your property tax. And once you do that, it's frozen. It doesn't matter if you hit the lottery the next year. When you qualified, if your income was at the level that allowed you to qualify, then you're frozen from that period on. We passed a law that said that disabled residents could also freeze their property taxes. But what we didn't say when we originally passed it was that it was frozen forever, regardless. So every year, if you're a disabled person, you have to go back, fill out the paperwork, and get it frozen basically every year. What this is saying is that we're going to change it to mirror the 65-year-old, whereas once you qualify and you freeze it, you don't have to bother going back. It's frozen for the rest of your life. So that's number 9. And that's for disabled, yes?
You say frozen, you don't have to pay it.
No, frozen at whatever level it is when you go. So if there's future increases in values of property and your taxes would go up,
You're still paying the rate.
you're paying the rate that it was whenever you froze it. That's correct.
Is there
It's the
anything
income,
for,
not value of property.
No. I'm saying if your property taxes go up,
Right.
would go up, then you wouldn't.
It says there's future increases in your income.
In the individual's income.
Right.
Right. Then it wouldn't factor in. Right now it factors in, because if you're
Right.
disabled and you don't have a lot of money, you can go get it frozen. But the next year, if you inherited money and you had a lot of money and you went to freeze it, well, you wouldn't qualify anymore
Right.
because you had more income. This would make it like the 65-year-old. Yes, ma'am?
what if you're under 65 and you're disabled and you own your own home? Does
Yeah,
that- what-
yeah. This
what
one,
does that
for
go?
the disabled residents in current law, you don't have to be 65. If you're designated as a disabled resident, you can go freeze it. But you're required to go freeze it every year, and you have to show your income. And this would say, well, we're going to treat the disabled residents the same way we treat the 65-year-olds. That once you go and you freeze it, then it doesn't matter what happens to your income, doesn't matter, it's frozen from that point forward. Yes, sir.
There was some inequities some years ago. The advertiser reported it. Property along Ambassador Caffrey, where the current new stores are, they were only $11 taxes because it was called
Agriculture.
Agriculture, yeah. Now, see, that wasn't right.
No,
Because they sold that, probably for 100,000 acres.
oh yeah, no, I'm sure.
Same thing is now true in committee rules.
Yes.
This is more of a clarification on what was being frozen. Is the assessed value frozen or their millage rate frozen?
The assessed, well, that's a good question. Hold on, let me make sure, because I don't want to misspeak.
You must not be room for
It's not germane to this amendment. I just wanted to know what was frozen.
No, it is actually, that's an interesting, it's whatever it is for the 65-year-olds, but now that you're asking me that, I'm
Well, it really only changes the need to certify every year, right?
that's right,
It's
but,
not changing any of the other.
that's right. I mean, his question doesn't change any of it, but now I'm just kind of curious, is it the threshold?
Qualify for the additional exemption.
No, right, I understand. I just wanted to know what is actually being frozen. Like, I guess if we assess another village in the future, do these?
Well, no, it would go up, because this is saying the current Constitution says the assessed value of their homes are locked in to prevent increases that might boost their property tax bill.
Okay.
So I would think if there's a brand new millage, then you're gonna have to pay that.
Okay, all right,
That's right,
all
but
right.
the value of your home, if it was set at 100,000, when you froze it, then it's gonna be at 100, doesn't matter if that neighborhood goes crazy and it's worth 250, you're gonna pay on the 100. So any new millage would be added though, so it could go up for that reason. Anybody else on those two? All right, number 8 is the Artificial Reef Development Fund. This is the one I'm struggling with the most, and I I'll try to explain why I'm having a struggle with it. Back in 1986, well, let me back up. Just in general, when a drilling company in the Gulf of Mexico is finished drilling, the production and all is done, the drilling company is required to remove that rig and platform out of the Gulf, and that's a very expensive proposition. In 1986, the legislature came up with an idea and said, hey, we've got an idea. These platforms and the metal would actually make good artificial reefs. So we'll allow you to just sink it and pay us into this artificial reef fund half of what it would have cost you to tear it down and take it out. And we can kill two birds with one stone. We can build these artificial reefs that the marine life can attach to and kind of build up the marine life and the fishing and do good in the Gulf of Mexico, and have this fund that's available to monitor the program and make sure people aren't just throwing everything down there and doing it the right way. And so the program, has merit, and it's been in place for, like I said, since 1986. And so the money's paid into this fund, and that fund is then used. And there are times when the legislature goes in and we look at our revenue and we're crafting the budget, and based on the projections of what sales tax and income tax and severance tax and royalties and all of the income that the state's going to have, we say, oh, it's going to be about 100 million less, 200 million less than what we had last year, so we need to craft a budget. So higher ed and healthcare, we got to figure out where we're going to cut that 200 million. And then one of the first things that happens is we look at all of these funds that are part of the statute, not the Constitution, statute, to say, all right, you didn't spend, you got 10 million sitting in your artificial reef fund, you got 500,000 sitting in this wildlife and fish, you got all of these funds. Rather than cut higher ed and healthcare, if you didn't spend it, you obviously didn't need it, we'll take it and we won't cut those guys as much as we were going to have to cut. And that's happened pretty consistently over the years. This would say whatever money goes into the artificial reef fund is protected by the Constitution, and that's not one of the funds you can use to help in those years when you have these budget shortfalls. The oil and gas industry and the commercial and recreational fishing industries are for this bill 1,000%. And then there's other folks that see that, well, it could cause problems to higher ed and healthcare, and so maybe they're not so positive on it.
But it says right here on number 8, for purposes other than those described in the amendment. Well, we don't know what's described in the amendment. There's the biggest case for tomfoolery there that I can imagine, just from the...
Let me see, let me grab one of the things you're looking at. Can I have one? Just to see how it's worded.
Number 8. That's scary right there. It says, using this money for purposes other than those described in the amendment. Well, the amendment might say, we're going to boost the governor's new jet, or...
Oh, yeah.
So
Okay.
that's only half of a...
Yeah, so a yes vote would say that the artificial reef fund is protected by the Constitution, and we cannot use it for anything other than that program. And if there's 20 million in excess, because there may be one year where there's a lot of rigs that they pay the money to have them sunk. And then there may be another year where there's really none, and so they would use the money from the previous years.
But the Louisiana state constitution is full of holes.
I'm not...
There's lots of ways
Yeah.
for... it's, in other words, we don't know what's described in the amendment.
Well, no. What they're saying, if I read it, the way I read it was that right now, we can pretty much use it for anything. Right now, I'm saying that if there's a budget shortfall and cuts are gonna fall on higher ed and healthcare, then we would use the money for that. But I'm being the good government guy. That's not to say that if the governor wanted to sweep the money when there's hardly any shortfall and sweep the money and use it for state police to get a new fleet of planes, we could sweep the money out. Now, it would have to pass the legislature. You know, that would have to be, it would have to pass the full House and the full Senate to do that. But right now, in statute, we can sweep the money out of the artificial reef fund. And if we pass the amendment, it takes the artificial reef fund out of statute and puts it in the Constitution, so we can't touch it.
Why didn't they list the purposes described in the amendment?
Well, it's saying a yes vote would establish the fund in the Constitution and prohibit using its money for purposes other than those described in the amendment. And in the amendment, let's see, I'll read the actual amendment language. Let's see. The proposed amendment would add the artificial reef fund to the list of all funds protected in the Constitution from being swept of cash when the state is looking for additional money to help balance the state budget.
Okay, what is described in the
Well,
purposes?
that's what I'm looking for.
I mean, I have seen barges offshore and they're pushing gravel off the barges down by Cameron down there. I guess that was brief development. That was 30 years ago.
You know, I'm noticing that is one shortfall of the handout. It doesn't have the actual ballot language on it. Mr. Ray, you had a newspaper article from the Advertiser. Did it have the ballot language in the article?
For which one?
Well, for any of them. Let me just look and see if the ballot language is in. It doesn't have the ballot language.
See, that's not full disclosure then.
You're right, and I apologize, but with all of these different things we don't have the actual ballot language in front of us. So let me back up and propose the amendment for or against this way. If it's put in the Constitution, it's better protected than where it is now. Now, it's not foolproof, because I'm sure there's ways around it, but if you want to protect the fund, then you should vote for the amendment because it's going to place it in the Constitution, which makes it a whole lot harder for the legislature to get their hands on to balance the budget. If you would rather the legislature have the money to have the flexibility to not have to cut higher ed health care or bump the governor's salary up or whatever they're going to use it for, then you would leave it like it is and vote no. Fair enough? All right, 9 we talked about already. That was the tax exemption for the permanently disabled residents. 10 we talked about. That was the tax sale of the blighted and abandoned and vacant property. Number 11 increases the number of the state departments from 20 to 21. Under the general admin, there used to be a Department of Elderly Affairs. It was a separate department, a separate state department, just like Department of Natural Resources, Department of Health and Hospitals, Department of this, Department of that. There was also a Department of Elderly Affairs. In an effort to save money, cut back, the governor rolled the Department of Elderly Affairs into one of the existing departments. I think it might have been in the governor's office. Let me just look to make sure. I don't want to misspeak. Yeah, so it's part of the governor's department now. There was a debate, should it be in social services, should, Department of Social Services, Department of Health and Hospitals. Ultimately, it's in the governor's office. It's one of the divisions within the governor's office. This amendment, and so there's a lot of concern from the elderly community that they're not going to get the attention that they should, since they no longer have their own department that's looking into and analyzing and funding elderly affairs. By having it in the governor's office, it's just a division within it, and it's one of the many things that the governor has oversight. This basically breaks it back out of the governor's office and creates a new department again called the Department of Elderly Affairs.
Yay.
There you go. Number 11. 12 is Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission. Right now, the Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries Commission is a board made up of 7 members appointed by the governor. And right now, the southern part of the state has maybe 5 of the 7 members. and the folks from the northern part of the state are not happy about that. And so they're trying to put into the Constitution that they would mandate that some North Louisiana folks are appointed to this commission. You know, the governor appoints according to population more than anything else. You try to keep it regional, but whereas he may say, I'm not going to give one to the northeast, to the northwest, to the central, he looks and says, well, the majority of hunting and fishing activities occur south of Interstate 10, so those areas are going to make up the board. Now, you could get a governor next time from the north that does the exact opposite. But what this does is it mandates the appointments have to be so many from the north, so many from the south. I was surprised it passed the legislature to even get on the ballot, because I don't think it's a good idea. But obviously I'm biased since I'm not from North Louisiana. The North Louisiana folks are pushing very hard for this, so they'll get a pretty good 100% yes votes.
I don't believe I've ever read or heard anything about the Wildlife and Fisheries Commissioners. I don't know any names, don't know where they meet.
That makes two of us.
I don't know anything about it.
That probably makes a bunch of us, but you and I for sure are in that boat. So I can say 12's from a personal opinion, 12's the only one I know I'm voting no for. Just because I don't think it's, the North Louisiana should be able to mandate that they're included on any board, this one or any other. 13 was the Orleans Lower Ninth Ward, we did that one, and then 14 is the tax rebates, incentives, abatements. Basically, a while back, we went to these rotating sessions where we had a regular general session where if we wanted to change the speed limit, the drinking age, whatever, that's a general session item, and then the next year is a fiscal session item, and in a fiscal year is when you can increase taxes or you can give tax credits, exemptions, deductions, those kinds of things, and those were limited to fiscal years. Well, someone got clever because in a general year they wanted to give a tax credit to some industry, and they couldn't. They would have had to wait another year, and there was a company trying to move to, thinking about moving to Louisiana, and they wanted to be able to offer them these tax credits, but there was nothing on the books that allowed for it, so they called it a rebate. And so now you can do rebates in general years. So there was just a wording loophole that they came up with. What this amendment does is it adds the word rebate to the law, which basically means that you can only do credits, deductions, exemptions, rebates in fiscal years, which will eliminate the ability for us to give tax rebates during general session. It's closing a loophole that technically probably should be closed. You could make the argument that, well, no, if the situation exists where some big manufacturing facility wanted to come in and it was the year that we're in a general session and we wanted to offer them some incentive to come, we wouldn't be able to do it until the next year. And so, you know, they would have to decide to come here on the promise that it would be done rather than being able to just call it a rebate and get it done and passed in the current session. So that would be the other side of that argument. But it is clearly a loophole right now. It's just a word that they figured they could get around the current restriction. That's the 14 amendments. If anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I think there's a detachable piece of the thing that Nancy had and passed out for y'all if y'all wanted to take it in with you, because I know there is a time limit when you're in the booth, and with 14 amendments, that could take a lot of time, especially since we didn't get to go over the ballot language tonight, so you'll be reading the ballot language while you're in the booth. Anybody else? All right, thank you all.
I'd like to just announce 2 weeks from tonight, we have on the 17th, we have Jan Swift. She's the president or the chair lady, Upper Lafayette. She also sits with the LePesc, which is a organization that we've been going to meetings and hoping that we can make an improvement in the educational system. There's 15 organizations belong to it, and Upper Lafayette is one of those. Concerned citizens belong to it. UL does. I don't know if some of the members here possibly know that, but just in case you don't, there are 15 different organizations that belong, and we meet at least once a month. So if you'll be here on the 17th, we also will probably have the individuals that ran for school board, all of them present, hopefully, for that night. That's the 17th of this month. So if there's no other questions, the meeting stands adjourned. We appreciate all of you coming out tonight.